All right.
Perfect.
Good.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we really appreciate you joining us and agreeing to do a little question and answer, especially during the busy holiday season. I know you got lots going on. Yeah, but I think we'll just jump into it so that we don't have to keep you for too long. We have you till, I think, for an hour, right? For now it's 55.
Right.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, we'll just jump into. Does anybody have a question that they want to? Yeah. Maybe you're nodding your head.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Do you want to just come up and then?
Yeah, just give me a second. I'm
some.
going to. I wrote something so I don't forget.
Here.
So here.
Yes. Yeah. You can just. Yeah.
Hi, Tom. Nice.
Hello.
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 Ole, thank you very much for being such a big inspiration to all of us. I think it's really nice what you do. You seem to bring out the best in all of us, so I really appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome.
And Vanessa, of course, is here like our connector, right? She's bringing everybody together. I wanted to ask you a question today about a topic that have been of my interest for many years now, which is life after death. And I was listening to one of your videos, and I'm going to be reading what I heard. So what you were saying was that consciousness is not affected at all because the consciousness and the body are two separate entities. There are two different realms.
Mm-hmm.
And when we transcend, what happens is that we are during a transition period sometimes, and it is related, connected to our fears or sometimes to our attachments to Earth, which I can relate to that. I've experienced things and became acquainted with some other people who went through. Did I do something? Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay. So I have my own beliefs also and my own experiences with that. So far it was so good. You talk about this transition frame, and sometimes people are confused or fearful, and they need some kind of guidance or help from source. And sometimes it happens that the presence of some past relative. Anyways, I'm going to make it shorter then, but I became, actually I felt quite reassured about what I heard, except for at some point you were saying that the presence of, you mentioned Uncle Harry, right? That, for example, shows up to help us during that time. And it is usually a very brief connection. And then we get into this kind of dream state and things seem to be vanishing. From the experience that I got, the presence of love is very, very important and very, very strong during that period. And when I heard this video, the explanation sounded to me a little bit too technical and cold. And I was with a friend actually who lost a child, not at some point in her life, and she was telling me that she didn't know how to take all this because her faith was that one day she would be reunited with this child. So we were talking about, so I would like you to please talk a little bit more about that and the princess, the role of love after death. How do you see that, if there is a role of it or not?
So I got most of what you said. Sometimes words were dropping out and whatever. So let me kind of recast the question. Okay. The life after death and the transition, the problem for you was, and for your friend who had the child that had died, was that the relationships you have in this particular lifetime, the question is, do they continue on, or do they end there?
The connection of love that from my experience, is the gluing part is what really helps during that transition. So I wanted to know your opinion on that.
Okay.
We are on Earth. We agree that love is the answer, right? But I wanted to know what happens after if we still do have that connection.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now what we're doing here, of course, is we are evolving the quality of our consciousness. We are learning to grow up. We're learning to create higher qualities of consciousness for ourselves. And the way we do that is by becoming love. So love is always very important. Love is the key thing. We're here to become love. And that doesn't change. And we do that by making choices. Okay, and we have a lifetime and we make choices. We have relationships. We get connected with parents and children and siblings and that sort of thing. So we make our choices in terms of relationship for the most part. Those are the choices by which we grow the most, is the choices we make in relationship with others. The choices of what kind of car do you buy really aren't the kind of choices that help us grow up that much. The choices of how you respond to other people, how you connect in your relationships, those are the things that help us grow up. And then when you die, okay, you hopefully have grown up some, you become a different person. You turn back into your individuated units of consciousness and you make a choice about where were you going to go to learn more. Okay, and then you have another lifetime and you go back into that lifetime and you start making choices again. And that whole thing repeats. So love is always about what you're about. It's always what it is you're trying to do. Grow up, quality of consciousness, become love. So that's true for all of it. But now what about those relationships in the past life? Well, there's some practical problems here for those relationships to continue on. In other words, your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters, your best friend, all those relationships that you have a lot of love poured into because that's been part of your growing with that relationship. But now this lifetime's over. Now when it's over, what happens is that you return to your IUOC and you start planning for the next one. If in the next one you maintained all those relationships, and let's say this is your, so if you retained all those relationships, you'd have maybe 20,000 children, 20,000 parents, maybe 50,000 siblings, and these would all be the people that you dearly, dearly loved in all of those relationships. That would be a bit much, wouldn't it, if we had that kind of pool all those together and you'd have 100,000 people that you truly just loved to death and were very close to, and they were very important to you in each of those incarnations. Well, you see there's a problem with that, obviously. Even if you cycled through them one at a time, in your lifetime, you wouldn't be able to get each one even to say hello. There would be too many of them. You don't have that many hours, you see, in your lifetime to really process all that information. So that's one reason these relationships of your loved ones eventually would just be overwhelming and you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's one problem. Another one is the way the system works is that if you did that, if you were to maintain those relationships, then you would have to bring your intellect back with you. In other words, you wouldn't just reincarnate with your quality, which is the way it works now. You'd have to bring back your memory because you'd need your memory of all of those relationships. Okay, and that just doesn't work well because the whole idea is that you come back with just your quality so that you don't have an intellect to allow you to game the process. In other words, without that intellect, you just interact the way you are. You are who you are, and you make choices the way you would make those choices. If you had the intellect, you'd be thinking, oh, okay, I shouldn't do this or I should do that, and you'd start playing the game out of your head, which would not help you grow up any. So that you don't want that intellect, because you want to just have to make choices out of your being level, not out of your intellectual choice. So then you couldn't remember. See, that gets in the way with that rule as well. So yes, love is the key thing. And the love that you connect with while you're here is the love that pushes you forward, that helps you grow. And it's the same with the other people. And now the third thing that doesn't make that work is that, okay, after after your child or Uncle Fred dies, before long, they are in another incarnation. That old one of Uncle Fred, that nice old guy, with the white hair and the pinstripe suit that he always wore, he doesn't exist anymore. That same entity now is a little girl in China, learning to, grow rice. And it doesn't work that way, because you move on. So those free will awareness units, that's your identity while you're here, your avatar, that just goes back to your individuated unit of consciousness. See, it was just a part of your individuated unit of consciousness to begin with. It was a part of your individual unit of consciousness. A partition was made to partition off that free will awareness unit. You die, that partition goes away, and that just becomes back to your individuated unit of consciousness again. Now, having said all that, there's also a possibility that there are some individuated units of consciousness with whom you just really click. You're good together. You connect well. You are good for each other's growth. And you may reincarnate with those same individuated units of consciousness multiple times, over and over again, just because you play it. One's a good foil for the other. You really bring out the best in each other. So you and 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever people may incarnate with a plan to interact together. And you may do this time and time again. So in that case, you're still not engaging with the same Uncle Fred, but you're dealing with Uncle Fred in a new body, in a new avatar.
It's the same essence.
See? So it's the same consciousness, but without that memory. So you see, that's the way it works. So there's a practical reason why those relationships just don't go on and on and on. It's a nice thought, and when you're here and you have somebody you dearly love, you feel like you'd want that to go on and on and on and never stop. But if that happened, you really wouldn't learn as much. That's not a very efficient learning process. You learn through doing new things with new people in new ways and doing them from the being level. Just continuing old things isn't really on your path to the most efficient learning process. So the system just doesn't work that way. So it's not that the system is cold-hearted and just doesn't care. It's that it's more efficient and more effective for you to become love, to learn more quickly, to have you engaged from the being level with a whole new situation each time. That is your best learning situation. So that's why it works that way. I know it seems kind of sad from the little picture viewpoint, but it's really much more efficient and effective from a bigger picture viewpoint.
Okay, thank you.
We have Rustin right there. Did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. You want to go? My question's in full form, but sure, yeah. Okay. Yeah, hi Tom.
Hello.
Really enjoyed the videos that Vanessa shared, with us from you, and learning lots from your book. But just one of the videos you shared with us, you spoke about 3 paths of growing up or evolving, being the path of surrender, the path of service, and the path of the warrior. And I have a question regarding the path of the service.
Okay.
Service. You talk about it being about others, not about you, and that's how we define love. And you mentioned love is about others and not about us. Yep. But my question is right. Where do we draw the line in regards to putting others first, as opposed to listening to what we need to do for ourselves to continue our growth and evolvement? Over the years, I've felt on numerous occasions that I've had to pull away from helping others in order to take better care of myself so that I could continue my growth. and it's always painful when it involves someone that you love and care deeply about. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. And, you know, I'll start out by saying that there are those times when what you need to do is let go. And there are those times when you need to move on rather than just stay, you know, in that same position as helping, you know, as helper. So those things are true. The way you differentiate between when is it a good thing to stay there and focus on others, and when do you need to focus on your own, you know, on your own growth growing up, and how do you know the difference? You learn to know the difference with experience, just like the experience that you've had. You know, you get wiser and wiser about when is it time to pack up and go on, and when do you need to hang in there a little longer and keep doing the work that you're doing. The way to make that decision is to look at the long-term entropy. Look at the long-term entropy of the system. If over the long term, by you staying and focused on this other, or even on others in general, in this situation, if you're in this situation and you continue doing that and continue putting your energy there, how is that going to lower entropy for the system over the long term? And if you decide to move on and let that situation go and move on to something else, you know, maybe your own growth in other ways or connections with other people or serving in another way, then you have to look at that and say, well, how's that going to affect the system, the entropy of the system in the long term? This would be hard to know. Okay, I think we're back. Okay, so I'm not, so anyway, you look at the long-term entropy for both choices, the one where you stay and continue to help and continue to make it about those others, or whether you move on, and where you think you're going to make, you know, the least entropy, or you're going to make the highest quality consciousness for yourself and for the system in the long term, that's the way you should go. So there is no fast rule about under this conditions do that, those conditions, you know, do the other thing. Each choice about whether to stay and keep pouring service into this thing or whether to move your service someplace else it's very situation dependent, and it depends on your own assessment of where the greatest learning and greatest good goes, and that's how you make the decision. So yes, sometimes it's time to move on and sometimes it isn't. One of the tests that I was given, many years ago, to see whether or not I had the right answer, and this is one of those where they gave you a question and then you told them how you'd react to it, and it was either you either got it right or you got it wrong, and when you got it wrong, the test was over. And the last one that I did was a situation where I was helping a group of people, and these people depended on me. You know, their welfare, their health, their finding shelter, they're getting food. I was somehow a key element in that, and my being there was essential for them in the sense that they were doing as well as they were doing, which wasn't all that well, but at least as what they were doing was because I was there to help them. And my choice was to stay there and continue to help these people that I cared for, that were like, you know, my own family, or to move on to something bigger and different and better. And my choice was, and that was a tough one. That was a very hard test for me. It was a very hard question to answer. And my choice was that it really was time to move on, that this was limiting me, even though it was being very valuable for these people. It was a limitation, and that the greater good was for me to move on. So I made that choice, and I went on to the next question. So I believe I made a correct choice there in that situation. But again, it's very situation specific. It depends what you're moving on to. You know, it depends on how capable these people are fending for themselves. Maybe they've become dependent on you, and by leaving may be the best thing for them, where they have to maybe carry on by themselves a little more. So in any case, it's tough
Oh, frozen again. Frozen again. I wanted to ask for anybody who's read the book, you remember he was given a series of tests? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to see if that was one of the tests that he was given in that series. If he comes back. I think he's back. Oh, are you back?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh.
I'm here. How far did we get? Did you lose the last part of that, or did you get enough to know what I was saying?
Yeah, we got enough to know. I just had a quick question to add to that was that one of the tests in your series of tests that you were given, the same as Robert Monroe was
Yes,
given?
that was one of the tests. That was one of my tests in a series of tests, yes.
And then how many other tests did you get after that one, just to see like what level that was at?
Well, that was the hardest. That was actually now that I think back about it, that was something that happened to me like 50, 60 years ago, long time ago.
Yeah.
As I think back about it, that was the last question in a series, and the questions got harder and harder as you went along. If you got it right, you got another one, and that was the most difficult question. And after that, the test was over, but it wasn't because I got it wrong. It was because the test was over. That was the hardest question, because I got that feedback afterwards that yes, that was the right answer, because they didn't, these tests are also learning tools.
Right.
So they need to give you feedback of what the right answer was. So I did get that was the right answer, but that was the last question in that series. And interesting enough, Bob Monroe had gotten that exact same series of questions. At that time, he'd just gotten it recently. He was maybe 50, and he got that question. I got that same test probably 30 years earlier.
Yeah, and you said you've met other people who have had those tests. Will we ever get that?
You may. I don't know. I have met several people who have had identical tests to mine. And when I say identical, I mean identical. Just every detail of it, the way it was presented, the words, everything was identical. So yes, these tests are standardized.
Wow. Teo's here. So, I went away for 6 weeks on a contract. Oh, can you still hear us?
It just came back. Yeah, it freezes for a few seconds and then comes back. So yeah.
I was just saying, Miss Teo has been taking over our practical application MBT group, and she has a question about fear, getting rid of fear. So oftentimes it can feel like, we're telling people just get rid of your fear and that'll solve all your problems. But her thing is, well, it's a lot harder than that. People have trauma, like real trauma, that they have to overcome. So what's the recommendation that you might offer for people who do suffer from trauma in terms of overcoming that trauma, moving past that trauma?
Okay, well, the first thing they have to do is accept that whatever it was that traumatized them happened. All right, that happened, it's done. So they have to get over the pretending it didn't happen, the wishing that it didn't happen, the going over and over in their mind that it happened some other way, and why did this happen to me? All that stuff has to be let go of. Otherwise, that's your ego. Just, why me? Why did this happen? What could I have done differently? And so on. And you just keep obsessing over what happened. So first step is to let it all go and just say, it happened for whatever reason. I accept that. Now, what I have to do is deal with it. So that's kind of step one, is accepting it. And I don't mean accepting it in that you're saying, oh, it was okay. It might not have been okay. It may have been an awful thing, but you just have to accept that. What would be another way of saying that other than accept it? You have to own it. It's yours. It happened to you. Maybe own it is a better thing. And now the question is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to deal with it?
Yeah.
Okay. So once you own it, it's no longer about, oh no, woe is me. What could have been different? Why did it happen to me? You're no longer on that track. You're just, how do I deal with it? It's done. It is. Stop fussing over it and now deal with it. And dealing with it can also be very difficult. You know, like people who have phobias. Let's say you have a phobia and you're afraid of spiders. And somebody says, oh, well, it's just a little spider, deal with it, you know, but you can't because it terrifies you. These kinds of things, fears are not rational. So you can't deal with it rationally. So you're not going to think your way through it, and you're not going to, you know, make up a lot of reasons in your head why, you know, how you should deal with it. You have to deal with it at a being level, because that's where the fear is. It's at your being level. You need to deal with it at that level. And one of the ways you do that is you just try to not give in to that fear. Okay, you see that spider, and rather than, you know, scream and run away, maybe you just stand there and watch it for a while, and then you scream and run away. Okay, now that's better because you stood there for a while first. The next time, maybe you'll stand there and after a while take one step closer, and then you scream and run away. You know, you see what I mean? You keep working up to it, to where you can maybe get up within 2 or 3 feet of it and just stand there and not scream. And you just have to keep working at it a little bit at a time with your intent. It's basically force of will. Your intent says, I don't want to be afraid of spiders, or I don't want to be upset because my boyfriend jilted me and took all my money and stole my car and left me with nothing in the gutter, you know. Okay, so that's terrible, and that's upset me, and now I'm afraid of relationships and all this sort of thing. So you have fears. Well, you have to say that fear is dysfunctional. The fear is keeping me from going on with my life. I need to deal with it. Well, just take a small step. Take a small step and then back up if you need to, and then take another small step. And eventually, with force of will, you work your way out of that hole. And that's the only way to do it. You have to have that strong intention to get over it, that you basically push yourself, force yourself to take just one more tiny step closer to that spider. Just one more thing that you do that you know, helps you get over this thing. Maybe you're afraid of big dogs, you know, so you find a big dog someplace and you find that it's okay as long as you don't touch him. And then maybe it's okay to pet him as long as somebody's holding them. And then it's okay to pet him when nobody's holding them. And you just work your way up little bit by little. So that's how you do it. Force of will, and keep trying and trying and trying, and eventually you will succeed. That's the good news. If you have an intention and you keep working and keep pushing on that intention, you will succeed. It's just not quick and not necessarily easy.
And that's why it's really helpful to have the big picture in mind, because then we understand that our whole purpose is to get rid of fear, and that motivates us to want to get rid of the fear of spiders or big dogs. Otherwise, if we don't know what we're doing here, we're like, no, I'm cool. I don't need to get rid of that fear. It's good. It can stay there. But this is the motivation that it provides the big picture. Yes, you had a question? We have 15 minutes with you, so I want to use it wisely.
I have to say something.
Oh. Okay, we have 15 minutes to rest of the question. But go ahead, Karen.
Okay, next time.
Go, okay, come. You might have to come down here though.
So in that situation that Tom Campbell is explaining about the fear, so when someone is in a state of anxiety, you cannot show on her face the fear. It's cruel, I think, somehow. So when we are talking about little spiders and things like that, that things like really create a high level of anxiety in someone. And that person can know that it's out of control in her mind, and she cannot accept it, and she cannot face any fear, because that's like killing her somehow. So I don't know. I would like to have a way to help that person that is in that state of high anxiety because of all the traumas that she had, when she was a little girl. And sometimes I don't find the right tool or the right answer through MBT to tell her, okay, do something very little that it really is going to help her to move forward. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, when people have that level of fear that they just can't accept it, and they can't, work on it, it's just so much that if they even just think about it a little bit, it just locks them up. Well, the thing to do then is to try to remove them from the source of the fear. If it was your fear of big dogs, then just don't ever, keep them from going around a big dog. Tell them, well, don't go in that neighborhood. There's lots of big dogs there. Stay at home. And you just, you have to get to the point where they do feel comfortable enough, and they won't feel that way until they feel safe. Fear is often an issue of personal safety. They don't feel like they can. Is everybody frozen?
No, we can hear you.
If you can hear me. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Everybody's back. Okay, we're moving again. If the fear's that bad, then you try to isolate them from that fear. You try to give them as much love, as much security, as many hugs, and just let the fear be for now, because they're not ready to deal with it. Make them feel as safe as possible, because it's a lack of personal safety that is the problem. It's a lack of personal being okay, whether that safety is actual, bodily safety, or whether it's safety as far as being afraid of being hurt. It's emotional safety, whatever. If you can do something that helps them feel more safe, that's the best thing you could do. That may be just being a friend, accepting them the way they are. Okay, you're afraid of big dogs. We won't go home that way. We'll take the long cut. We'll go the long way around where there aren't any big dogs, and that's okay with you. You see, so you don't point out to them that they're dysfunctional and you need to get over this and all that sort of thing. Just won't help. It makes it all worse. You kind of accept them the way they are and see if you can't make them just feel better and relax and feel safer, at least with you. And then maybe with you, they can start making progress on that fear, but not until they are no longer hysterical, if you will. If we're talking about a fear that's really gotten to the point that it's just hysterical. Yeah. Well, you got to get rid of the hysteria first before you get before you get to the process of acceptance and owning it, getting rid of it. First, you have to get down to where you can think and be a little more rational. And that usually is just by making them feel safer, loving them, caring for them, giving them hugs when they feel bad. Don't criticize them. Just give them a big hug and say, it'll be okay. I'm here. You see, that sort of thing, to make them feel better. And eventually that maybe help them gain enough personal strength and personal power that they can accept it and deal with it, but not until that. Unfortunately, in our society, we do all the wrong things. When people are afraid like that, everybody tells them that they're silly. Everybody tells them that, they're creating a problem for themselves. People say things like that, thinking that they're going to be helpful, but they're not helpful at all. That just makes it worse. It's better just to be as kind as you can to them and as compassionate as you can, and let them struggle with that demon as best they can and be there for them. You may try to tell them a few things, but remember, fear is not rational. If you try to be rational with them, oh, don't be afraid of a spider. It's just a little spider. It's only an inch long. It can't hurt you. Go over there and, pick it up. It won't hurt you. It's just a granddaddy long leg. They don't bite or anything. That just makes them feel bad about themselves, because now they feel ridiculous. Yeah. You see? So we do the wrong thing when we try to help them by pushing them into less fearful behavior. Better just to be with them.
Okay, thank you.
There are other PMRs within that NPMR. Could there be a possibility that these other PMRs coexist together in the same reality? And also, if there are other NPMRs that creates PMRs, can those PMRs and PMRs from this current NPMR coexist together?
What do you mean by coexist together?
Be in the same reality frame.
Well, reality frames can include other reality frames. So you can nest reality frames, just like you can nest subsets. You can have a superset, and from that's a subset, and then from inside that subset, you can have subsets of the subset. and subsets of the subset of the subset. So realities are like that. They can be nested in that way. So if we look at the reality of the larger consciousness system and say, okay, the larger consciousness system is the reality frame, then all of those various PMRs are all, you know, part of the same reality frame. They're all part of the larger consciousness system reality frame. And then there are some that, let's say, just work with this virtual reality. So we have our virtual reality we call physical matter reality, and we have this this reality frame that is where we end up after we die. It's the frame for getting reoriented and having another incarnation. Okay, that transition frame. Well, that's there just for us. So that's another reality frame that's tied to our to our reality frame. It's different, but the two of them work together. One of them services the other. So they basically service each other. So yes, you can have frames that are tied together logically, functionally, and you can get frames within frames. So all of that is possible. One day we might, on our computers, create a virtual reality in which the avatars have free will choices. And if we can do that, if we can give them free will choices where they can actually come to their own choice about what to do next and execute that, then a free will awareness unit will basically take them over as avatars. You see, they can use them as avatars. So now that's us creating an avatar that's worthy of a free will awareness unit's time to make the choices for that avatar. And just because that avatar was created by us in our computers doesn't really make any difference, because it's an avatar that makes free will choices, and units of consciousness will attach to that in order to make those choices in order to evolve. So there's another reality frame that we've created inside of this reality frame. And might we have been created inside some other reality frame? Well, yes. And is there any end to it? There may or may not be an end to it, but you get to the point where you say, we just can't know. That's beyond our knowing. We can only look at what's going on inside this frame. So we can get around for quite a bit inside the larger consciousness system to explore it once we kind of know how to do that. But you can't get outside of that system because we're consciousness. We're only defined in this system. We don't exist. We have no definition. We have nothing outside of this system. So we can't get outside of it to see if there's anything else that maybe we're a subset of. It's impossible. So it's not really that there's an infinite series. It's just you get to the point where you admit that it's impossible to know those things because we're limited beings and we can't go beyond the LCS to find out. So yes, nested realities are quite possible, and functional relationships between realities can be possible. Now, somebody from this virtual reality we call our physical reality may decide to have an incarnation next time in some other reality frame other than this PMR. It may be some other PMR. And that's allowed too. So there you'd have two reality frames that functionally we can operate between them. So yes, it's not that every reality frame is kind of an isolated island to itself. That's not the case. There is connections, but the connections all serve a purpose. They're not just random connections.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've taken up all your time that you've allotted for us. So thank you so much for that, Tom.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm sorry we had all the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what they were, but they persisted all evening.
Yeah, but it worked out in the end. We got all our questions answered.
Good. I'm glad. It always works out in the end, doesn't it? That's the way. That's always the way it is.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks, folks. Thank you for inviting me. Have a good party.
Bye, Tom.
So long.
So long. Bye. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.